into the Take the North podcast presented by Odyssey. I am Dan Wiederer, pleased to be joined today by a very special guest. He is a former Chicago Tribune sports writer. He is a former quarterback evaluator. He is my former co-host on the now defunct Bear Download podcast. He is an obvious Baltimore Orioles fan. Our pal, Rich Campbell. How's it going, Rich?
It's going great, man. Anytime I can talk about the draft without having to do the mock drafts, I'm good. So just give me the fast forward, give me the results, the answer key. We can get right to it. You've got some exciting things going on. What a draft for the Bears. What a time. What an offseason. A lot of optimism. I could feel it down here, even in Indianapolis. There's enough Bears support down this way. Incredible, really.
So part of that is going to be an entry point in a few minutes to some of the things I want to pick your brain about the past. And I thought it'd be really interesting to have you on here as the Bears flip the page yet again at the quarterback position and try to get themselves on a path to greatness with Caleb Williams as the number one overall selection. You obviously, in your time covering the NFL, had a chance to cover two other quarterbacks that were selected in the top two, both number two picks, Robert Griffin III in Washington, Mitch Trubisky here in Chicago. And so I think some of that perspective will be welcome and help us to frame our own kind of collective discussion on what's ahead for the Bears here. But I guess starting out through that lens, what strikes you about a team like the Chicago Bears having this opportunity yet again to try to get this right by flipping the page with a highly drafted quarterback and not just somebody that comes in hoping to make a difference?
Yeah, there's two lines of thinking. One of them is, here we go again. And by that, I mean another swing. You got to keep taking swings at the position until you get it right. So they're going to take another swing. But this one is a little different than the last swing, And so that's where, for me, okay, they're taking another swing, but it's a new GM, it's a new coach, it's a new offensive coordinator this time around. It's actually at the top of the draft. So you are choosing the number one player taken, not just Mitch, who was the number one quarterback taken. And so let's see how it plays out here. I mean, there's so much to factor in when you're thinking about the prospects of success. The supporting cast has evolved so much, and we can get into that. But just the excitement here, the build-up, the fact that you're going to sort of wipe the slate clean, take that Etch-a-Sketch, shake it, and it's now blank again. Get to know Caleb and go forward with that process, from your standpoint, covering the team, and from a fan standpoint, start to think about, again, all the variables that go into whether a quarterback is successful, because it is so much more than just picking a guy. That's only the start of the work, as you know. And the Bears are well aware of this. Ryan Poles well aware of this, with so much infrastructure already around Caleb Williams. I mean, the conversation about his prospects start there, and then you get him on the field for rookie camp and you start to build it.
So let's go back more than a decade to Washington, 2012. Interesting draft in the standpoint that the Redskins at the time knew who their quarterback was going to be well in advance of actual draft weekend. Everyone in the world knew that Andrew Luck was going one, and when the Redskins made that trade up to number two, was it the Rams that they traded with to get that pick?
Yes.
And you just knew that they were putting their chips in. Now, obviously, different than the Bears, they had to give up a lot to go and get the guy that they identified as their changer. But once they had him, there was a lot that had to go into setting him up for not only success, but immediate success. And obviously, we all remember the flashes of greatness in year one from Robert Griffin III. And I'd be curious, from your standpoint, what allowed the early success to occur so quickly and so really spectacularly?
Yeah, we'll back up even a little bit more, because I think the context for that selection is really important. The Redskins at the time were coming through 2 decades, 2.5 decades of total instability at the position. And they had maybe a year or two of consistency and some moderate success with quarterbacks like Brad Johnson in the late 90s and Mark Brunell in the mid 2000s, but nothing sustained, nothing like any team is trying to achieve. And when the Redskins traded up in position to select either Griffin who was the Heisman Trophy winner, or Andrew Luck, and again, you said it was obvious that it was going to be Griffin, there was a sense of hope that previously did not exist. I mean, the word to describe that whole dynamic was hope. And I think that's different from what the Bears are experiencing right now, because in many pockets of the fan base, there was real hope that Justin Fields was their guy.
Right.
And yes, I think the situations are comparable. The two franchises and their ineptitude and inconsistency at quarterback, maybe the Browns would match what the Redskins and Bears have experienced since the mid 80s. But really, those two franchises are on a separate mountaintop of futility at that position. And so the Griffin selection brought with it this hope. And it was after 2 seasons of rebuilding under Mike Shanahan. And famously, that coaching staff included Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, Matt LaFleur, and some minds that, I mean, probably not coincidentally, are going to shape Caleb Williams' experience with Shane Waldron. Right. So anyhow, Griffin came in as this effervescent personality, which folks now still see on television. I mean, he has that charisma, that zillion-dollar smile, great energy, and the athletic ability to match that. And when he was paired with Mike Shanahan, Kyle Shanahan, and those minds, they created an offense that allowed him to really thrive, despite the fact that at Baylor, Robert was not the most evolved passing quarterback. And he came to Washington, ended up throwing for 3,200 yards as a rookie and rushing for 800 more. I mean, he had 4,000 yards from scrimmage as Mike Shanahan and that staff really brought into the NFL the pistol, the read option, the veer, and some of these run concepts that Griffin, that really exploited what Robert was great at, which was straight ahead running. I mean, he would get running and he was a sprinter. And so it really took advantage of his gifts. I want to stop there because the story of how that fell apart is a different one. But as you think about how that applies to Caleb Williams and the Bears here, it's about infrastructure. It's about the minds coming together and adapting whatever offense or whatever program the Bears and Matt Eberflus and Shane Waldron have, and making sure it brings out Caleb Williams' strengths. And that's what enabled Robert Griffin to hit that springboard and go on to be Rookie of the Year, his first season.
Yes, I was going to say, it wasn't just the production. It was that the production was matched with success. They went on and went into the playoffs, and there was an opportunity there to build on that. And that's why you win Rookie of the Year honors, because you are the engine of team success. And that was clear that year. I was covering the Vikings. They hosted the Redskins hosted the Vikings that year in DC. And I remember leaving the stadium and being like, there's no way that guy's not that team's quarterback 10 years from now. You know, like, you just feel the entire world. While Robert Griffin III is kind of like the Matt Nagy reminder of Rookie of the Year, Coach of the Year. It doesn't always mean the greatness is going to last. And we'll get into that in a minute. But, you know, what I'm really trying to shine a light on here with the Bears currently and Caleb Williams is what do you do to take a guy that has so many obvious gifts and give back to him in a way that gets him off the ground and gets his career launched in the right way. And I'm appreciative of the way that Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus and their respective staffs have been very intentional about this process of not just kind of crossing their fingers and going, man, we've got a guy with all these elite gifts, I hope it works. But like looking at 7, 8, 9, 10 different branches of the tree and figuring out how can we make this ideally suited for him. It's obviously an exact science. There's some organizations that figure it out, some that don't. But it does feel like, on the surface anyway, there are maybe some parallels of just being able to really dial in on what a quarterback's gifts are, what makes him tick, and then just trying to tailor that early developmental plan in a way that really produces early success.
Well, my question for you would be, how much do you weigh the on-field components to that versus the off the field? And there's just so much that goes into this. Everything from supporting cast, you know, at the receiver position on the offensive line, to mental health and communication with your offensive coordinator, and on and on and on. And is he is he, meaning Caleb or Robert Griffin at the time, are they ready for the attention, the media scrutiny and all of that? I go back and forth sometimes on what's more important, but I lean toward the football side and positioning the player with other guys who bring out the best in you as a player athletically. I'm going to read you the skill position players from that 2012 Redskins team. That, and
I hope you have them for the 2017 Bears as well. So
we could do that exercise together, but it's along those lines. And remember, Robert Griffin threw for 3,200 yards and rushed for another 800. So you're talking 4,000 yards from scrimmage here, like 27 touchdowns. Okay. His receiving core was Josh Morgan, Pierre Garçon, and a 33-year-old Santana Moss. Okay. His running backs were Alfred Morris and Roy Hillou, and Fred Davis was the tight end. Okay. Now, you could take that wherever you want to go. Mike Shanahan's a genius, or Kyle Shanahan's whatever, or Robert's a great player. It all factors in, and they got a lot out of that supporting cast. Obviously, you hear those names and you immediately think of the 2024 Bears, and by comparison, they're loaded. I mean, I'm not saying loaded against the league as it stands, but by comparison, they're loaded.
No, they're loaded.
So there's so many reasons to believe that the football part of that is where it should be in order to help Caleb Williams get off the ground. You could say offensive line, maybe the investments haven't been similar, but in the next breath, you talk about Caleb Williams's improvisational abilities, and maybe he helps overcome whatever shortcomings there are in pass protection for the time being. And they can scheme ways to get around that. So then you move on to the relationship side, maybe the intangible side, communication and his chemistry with Shane Waldron, for example. How does that fit into Matt Eberflus's program? What about assistance around the quarterback and OC, which the Bears have put a lot of emphasis on getting that support structure just right? And so it's just really clear overall that Ryan Poles, again, I love how you mentioned it, not an exact science. And certainly, I mean, I think if you think about the Bears example with Mitch Trubisky and Ryan Pace's program, Ryan Pace was equally as thoughtful about putting into place that structure to help the quarterback win and help lift the team. It didn't work, obviously, but I think you can get to this point, at least in Caleb Williams's, future, or the springboard that he's on right now with the Bears, and see a lot of reasons to believe that success is around the corner.
I try not to fall into the trap of saying like, oh, it's totally different now, like this is just different, because it's so easy to do in the early stages. The honeymoon period makes the excitement feel more significant than you remember it being with previous guys. But I will say that I do have an appreciation for the wide lens that Ryan Poles has used in understanding that what you just said there, that the football component here is huge. You got to make sure that the guy is capable of playing football at the highest level possible as quickly as possible. But at the same time, there are a million details that go on outside the peripheral vision that you want to try to do everything as an organization to try to make sure that you're creating guardrails, or I guess a safety net, or whatever it is, in case the struggles occur. And how do you navigate that? And so there is, I had a conversation with someone in the building today about understanding the way that Caleb Williams is wired. And Lincoln Riley, we played this on our podcast last week, has been very emphatic about how just eager of a learner that Caleb Williams is. A guy constantly thriving off of feedback, thriving off of criticism, wants information, wants to know how it is, and needs that back and forth relationship. And so the Bears are really truly betting that there is high level compatibility between Caleb and Shane Waldron, in a way where Shane, who has a reputation as being an elite teacher, which they all do when they're hired, right? Like you said, every time a new coordinator is hired, he's a great teacher. Never heard anybody teach an offense, a complex offense in simple form like this guy. But they're hoping those two things link up in a way that's mutually beneficial and is just fueling. And I'd imagine maybe that would resonate with you a little bit to some extent.
Yeah, but at the same time, when you say, "Oh, he loves the criticism. We love how dedicated he is," on and on. I mean, just take the name Caleb Williams out and substitute Mitch Trubisky in, and you get some of the things that were being said about Mitch. Ultimately, he just didn't play to the level that you need a championship quarterback to play at. And when I think of that level, I think about anticipating receivers coming open in tight NFL windows. I think about reading coverages, getting to the right play, and just physically putting it together on the stage when the moment is climactic, and it's the difference between winning and losing. Do you make the play? And we'll see if Caleb can do that.
Stop there for a second, because it just reminds me of like 150 discussions that we had toward the latter stages of the Mitch unraveling, right? And obviously, you weren't around for 2020, but like in 2019, there were these games where we would spend the entire next week just skewering someone for not making a play that didn't, the result went haywire, and you're like, oh, that was Nagy's fault, or that was Eddie Piñeiro's fault, and then when you zoomed out, you were like, well, wait a second, if the quarterback just made those plays that were there to be made when they were there to be made, this discussion doesn't happen. And it's like such a constant reminder in the NFL. It's the same thing with Justin Fields. How many times did the Bears have the ball late in the game with a chance to go lead a drive to tie the game or go ahead, and failed? And you're just like, okay, man, like just make one of those plays, just make it every so often. And now the entire discussion and the entire narrative and the entire frame that the team is playing within is completely different. And I think sometimes we lose that, just how simple and how complex it is just to find a guy that can do that can meet the moment.
Yeah, and it's not robotic. It's not mechanical. You can't just flick the switch and you have your computer operating and it nails it. I mean, you've got to put this support structure in place and hope that the human guy goes and does it. When I think about Robert Griffin in 2012, the Redskins started 3-6. So even after that week early in the season, probably early October, when the Vikings came and Griffin had that walk-off TD run and was jumped in the crowd, and it was that moment. We did an oral history on it at the Washington Times the next week, because it just felt so transformational for the franchise. And we were kind of mocking ourselves, and a little bit of parody to that. But he struggled after that, and then he started to put together these moments, and you saw what a performer he was. And ultimately, if we can get into in a bit how it came unraveled, but he got hurt.
Yeah.
And it was a big part of it. He tore his ACL, or partially tore his ACL. And so, boy, when you have that magic, that guy who's just capable of making it work, you have to do everything you can to protect it. And before you know you have it, do as much as you can around it to try to get it to come out. So it's taking pressure off him off the field. It's trying to allow him to focus on his weekly job of learning the game plan and all that. I think the Bears, I mean, certainly Ryan Poles understands this in the way he was able to see, let's say, Patrick Mahomes' development early in his career. Now, different case, and Poles has acknowledged that Mahomes sat and watched, but still, Pat Mahomes, if you're using him as a comp, which he's the standard, so I think it's fair, especially when you consider where Ryan Poles has come from, understands it, that there's just those playmakers, that there's guys that just have it. And from your research on Caleb Williams, you're finding out that, he does too. And we're going to see if it translates to the NFL level.
Yeah, and that's it. Like, the degree of difficulty of playing this position at even a middle tier level is something that, in my decade plus of covering the league, the appreciation level for that is just off the charts in a way that I didn't have it previously. Of just, man, this is really, really hard. And some guys fail not because they don't work hard, not because they're not talented, not because they're not smart enough, but because it's really bleeping hard to play this position at a high level. And so I always remind myself, number one, that like the premature declarations of arrival have to be something that we guard against. We did it with Justin 2 years ago in this town, and I was pumping the brakes, and people were yelling at me, "Why are you pumping the brakes? This kid's got it." Okay, well, because I sat in Soldier Field when Mitch Trubisky threw 6 touchdown passes against the Buccaneers, right next to you in that press box. I think 5 of those touchdown passes were in the first half. I tell the story all the time about going to the owners' meetings in 2019, and you remember that night, the reception gathering, the Monday of the owners' meetings in 2019.
Love those gatherings. I remember all of them.
Like we were having an unbelievable time. Matt Nagy's the coach of the year at that point. Ryan Pace has just collected his executive of the year trophy at that meeting. I'm standing there with you going, man, like this is something that's built to last here. We've got an executive of the year, a coach of the year, a quarterback that just went to the Pro Bowl, albeit as an alternate. I was like, man, like we're set up here to be covering a team that's going to be good for the next 7 or 8 years. And my obvious epilogue to that story is the next time I was back at the owners' meetings in that same location in Arizona, you were gone out of the business. Matt Nagy was gone from Chicago. Ryan Pace was gone. And so, I mean, like life comes at you fast in the NFL. And so any feeling like we've arrived has to always be, I guess, accompanied by the realization that no, you haven't. Let me see it for 5 consecutive years, and then I'll say that you've arrived.
Well, all right. And the scary thing is it's not an isolated example. So go back to 2012 with the Redskins. Okay. Robert Griffin was injured late in that season. He was running, past the line of scrimmage, got hit, injured his ACL, missed some time, ended up being ineffective in the playoff game against the Seattle Seahawks that they lost at home. Oh, by the way, rookie quarterback on the other side of the ball Russell that day Wilson. Ended up, Robert beats Russell Wilson out and others for rookie of the year. And, now 12 years later, Russell Wilson is a bad handoff call away from being a first ballot Hall of Famer, so even when you've got that golden ticket in your hand, it might not be in your hand, which is that's terrifying. And so what I would advise, and it's not easy, and I don't say this lightly, is that just everyone has to just constantly take a breath, try to find the middle. You got to try to find the middle. You can see the best case scenario. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, go nuts. I mean, the Bears fans deserve the excitement, the thrill, the hope that is in front of them right now. But it's self-preservation to match that with some perspective and understanding of how tenuous this type of feeling and can be, and how fleeting success is, and how dastardly these mirages are in the NFL. I mean, I can read you a list of quarterbacks drafted number 1 overall over the last 15 years, and you tell me if you'd sign up right now.
I think 6 of them are on the Bears' schedule this year. So.
yeah. I mean, would you sign up for him to be as good as Andrew Luck was?
Yes.
Okay. Jameis Winston?
No.
Jared Goff?
Yes, but although Jared Goff had to go to a new place to really emerge.
Matt Stafford?
Right.
Same thing.
I would even sign up for what Matt Stafford did with the Lions. He didn't have the supporting cast, but the production was number 1 pick worthy for a long time.
But that's not what Bears fans are thinking right now. They're thinking, you're thinking sustained team success.
Right.
Rightfully so. That's what it's about. Kyler Murray.
Right.
Who would you rather have right now, Caleb Williams or Kyler Murray?
Caleb Williams.
the polish wears off really quickly.
No, you're right.
And so it's just it's a thought exercise to just keep it in perspective. And we talked about this when Mitch was drafted, how the odds are always against the superstar QB. And so I think it's fair to acknowledge that, and at the same time, embrace what the Bears are putting in place here. I mean, you have to take your swing, and this is, a 3-0 count, green light, with the BP fastball,
right?
And they'll take their swing.
So that's what I've said here consistently for the last few months, is that Caleb Williams may never go to the NFC Championship game. The pick would still be right. It would still be the right pick to make at the time, because it was the move that they needed to make. And it was an understanding that this was the swing worth taking at the time that it was available to them to take. And so that part of things is going to be interesting to play out. Let me bounce around a little bit, because you introduced a couple of things there that I think help advance the discussion in some different ways. But number one is like that reminder of like not falling for every bit of glee that naturally mushrooms up in this situation is something that us as reporters have, got conditioned to doing. It's funny because Caleb Williams' introductory press conference 2 weeks ago featured just an unbelievable moment where Herb Howard asked him a question about his willingness to kind of lean into the pressure and the expectation and not duck when human nature urge might be like, I just need a little break. I need to duck and get away from this for a little while. And Caleb Williams' answer, spur of the moment in that back and forth in the press room, was, what's the reason to duck? And it felt like a mic drop moment of a guy that was just ready for this. And then, of course, I zoom out a couple days later and I search back to Justin Fields' first press conference after his first rookie minicamp practice, and he said, "I'm built for this." And the entire, everybody types it into the Twitter machine right away. I'm built. Oh, Justin Fields built for this. He's got all the mental toughness. He's got everything that you'd want in that position. And then 3 years later, he doesn't get a second contract, and he's traded to a new team. And so like that reminder of like, this may not end well is daunting. At the same time, the excitement is legitimate and it's real. And now there's just a lot of stages to clear to turn it into more than excitement.
Yeah. I mean, there's no reason to be afraid of it, and there's no reason to be pessimistic. But in the past, let's say if you throw a QB1 party, I'm sitting here just thinking like, Chicago, better than this. Like, if anyone knows the perils here, it's Chicago. But at the same time, that explains the unbridled excitement, because my gosh, the times have just been so disheartening. I mean, over and over again. And so, yeah, embrace it all. And look, he could win Rookie of the Year and not build on that. We saw it with, like you said, Matt Nagy, Coach of the Year. There was an Executive of the Year, and it didn't go anywhere.
You brought up Kyler Murray. He was Offensive Rookie of the Year, I believe.
And so you just sort of take it a step at a time. I think the Bears management and who they have in place around him, they understand that. And that's a really good thing, that regardless of how well or how poorly he plays at the start of his career, it's about improvement, and the processes are in place to just make sure they're exploiting the things he does well within the offense.
We'll get into some Mitch stuff in a minute, and this is tangential to that, but like, there's a sense in Chicago right now that the level of very real enthusiasm and optimism rivals 2019 in recent vintage, in terms of this excitement level of like, oh man, we just got on the roller coaster ride that we've been waiting to board for a long time. This feels like it's going to be so much fun. And you lived through that off season where it was like, okay, they won the division. They've got this defensive game wrecker in Khalil Mack. The quarterback seems to be making progress. The Bears 100 coincided with that summer, which brought together that pep rally in Rosemont, which I always reference because I don't know that there's been a time during my time in the league, and I wasn't here for 06, obviously, but where the city was as electrified by the hope. And it wasn't just like false hope, like we were there with them and being like, no, this is real. Like, this team is built to go deep. They were built to go deep this last year, and they should conceivably be better. And then we know how that all turned out. I'm curious what you remember just about the size of the hype, the size of the hope, all of the things that were in that summer, and how justified it was, and maybe how it compares from afar to what we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, it was intoxicating. I mean, really fun to be around, fun for us to go to work, fun for us to consider possibilities, and knowing that there's a lot of attention on the team. The personalities were compelling. They were a positive product. There was just a lot of positivity. Who doesn't love being surrounded by positivity? You look back and you just understand that, especially, and I'm not saying injuries derailed that season, but because of the injury factor in pro football, everything is even more tenuous, because your guy gets hurt, and then what? I mean, take Joe Burrow in Cincinnati when he injured his knee, I believe his rookie year. I mean, that delayed that evolution there, and it's just one example. But yeah, I mean, legitimate hype. The defense was awesome. And it just you look back on it and go, how in the world did that 180 so fast? It went from Coach of the Year, Executive of the Year, to they were out of the city, out of the team in 3 seasons. Yeah. Incredible. Yeah. In that moment, if you had said, if you had tried to, what would you bet? What are the odds of this? It would have been astronomical, and just
like, I'm getting goosebumps right now thinking about being in that Rosemont Convention Center, and just like that,
because
was
the hot dogs they were serving up in the back. On
no, but it's like you had this, this football royalty. You had these Hall of Famers. Okay. You had Butkus, and then you had the members of the 06 Super Bowl team, and you had an entire city. It was like this perfect storm of like, this is what this city should feel like, and it shouldn't just feel like this once every 7 to 8 years. It should be like there should be a run of 5 years where this is every summer. And there's players that were around back then that are like, man, I think Kyle Long referenced it when he was on our pod a month or two ago. Like it just like it should be how it is, and not just like, oh, every once in a while you get to experience this. Part of that, and I've told this story before, and your perspective would be good on this, but I remember the mushrooming attention that came with that entire offseason and then into training camp. And we asked questions privately to each other, like, do you think the Bears are ready to handle all of this? Right. Like the crush of daily demands on interview requests and spotlight and this and that. And I recall being at training camp in Bourbonnais. We're still in Bourbonnais back then. And it was like week 2 of training camp, and Danny Trevathan, who was one of the most affable players on that team, most willing to talk ever, was like already fried and then was like turning down interview requests and doing so grumpily. And you and I were just kind of like, oh man, like it's August 3rd. And if this is already starting to kind of grate on them, like they need to find ways to position themselves for greater success under the crush of attention and spotlight. And I bring that up because Caleb Williams, it was very clear to me at his introductory press conference that we've never seen a player like this where everything he does is going to be chronicled. I've referenced LeBron James. I do think that's a fair comparison in terms of from the day he steps into the league, every word he says, every move he makes, everything he does is going to be viral in some way or another. And you've got to be ready to handle that both as an individual, as a team, and as an organization.
Well, yeah. And you're talking about before he's even stepped on the field at this point. And so can he compartmentalize that and then perform? I mean,
can they?
think that, yeah. I mean, that was the dynamic in Washington when Griffin was there. I mean, he was just so charismatic and so perfect for what that fan base was looking for. Just pure excitement when he had the ball and the personality to go with it. The color in his personality, the charisma. That's why he's on television now. I mean, that stuff plays really well on TV too. And you can see it come through. And so it will wear on you if you're not built for it. Also, it could feed you in a negative way if you're not well adjusted. I mean, if I look back on that 2012 Redskins team into 2013 and where that fell apart, there were some very strong personalities in that mix. Mike Shanahan with a lot of conviction about the efficacy of his system and his offensive mind. Robert Griffin coming off a knee injury and his willingness to play in an offense that was going to subject him to a lot of hits. The support system around Robert was affecting that dynamic as well. And so, this is part of the storyline with Caleb Williams as well. His support system, on his personal side, how does it all work together? I mean, these are things that are just going to have to play out. And, I would say, look, success breeds happiness and tranquility in those types of dynamics, but you're not always going to have the success. Injuries can be a factor. And so, again, it just speaks to the fragility of it all. And you just hope that Caleb is well-adjusted and strong enough and focused enough to minimize any problems they might present. And I'm curious, just from what you know about him so far and what you've learned about him, whether you think he is, his makeup is that way.
I'm curious to learn more about it, to be honest with you, because I like what I've really come to appreciate about getting to know him a little bit over the last stretch here is that like the passion is real, and like that is an incredible source of fuel in meaningful times, right? Like what that's like when you have that passion, it can take you to new heights. Now it can also be you're unraveling when things go sideways. And so you have to figure out a way to put that in the right equilibrium and manage it properly. And Caleb's 22 years old. And I have a feeling that his emotional equilibrium is going to be different in 2027 than it is in 2024. And it's like, can you weather some of the heaviest downpours while you're maturing, and so like, that's going to be there. Like, I think one thing that the Bears really feel confident about after going through the vetting process is that this means something to him. Those were questions in December where it was like, this is a guy that's lived his college life in the NIL spotlight. He's been able to chase national branding deals with Wendy's and car dealerships and Dr. Pepper and whatever else it might be. Does football come first? And I think their answer is unequivocally yes. That is what drives him, and that this other stuff is stuff that he takes advantage of, but it's not the thing that motivates him. And now look, like all of this comes down to what happens when you lose 3 games in a row in the NFL. What happens when the entire city now, a group of people that are probably loyal to Justin Fields say, see, it was the wrong move, are going to come crashing down on you. Another side's going to say they need to fire the coaches. Like, how do you handle all that? And we're not going to know that for a while. Hopefully we won't know it at all his rookie season because of this support system they put around him with 3 receivers, a guy that's got 10,000 in his career, another guy who's as good as anybody in the league right now in DJ Moore, and then a top 10 pick in Rome Odunze. But I guess that's a long answer in saying that, like, I think Caleb's made of the right stuff, but I think that it just all has to still come together, and it may take some time to do so.
Well, and then that passion is also, it can be, it's not just fuel, it's a focus. It does help you tune out some of that other stuff. And I think, you've seen that even with Justin, Mitch, when times got tough, they were able to turn inwards and focus on football. And then it's just a matter of performance, which over time wasn't consistent enough for them to, establish any permanence at quarterback there. And so, again, another swing, but it sounds like, Caleb Williams is the number 1 pick for a reason.
Right,
it's not just the football ability. It's all that goes into that. And so that part of it has been vetted to this point. And I think understanding just what Chicago is, the context here for the fan base is important. And I know Ryan Poles has mentioned this as well. Some of the past failures,
he's upset
being part of the conversation now
all the time.
I'm sorry, he doesn't get to set the terms on that. He has not lived through this like all of the season ticket holders have.
Right.
And so, for as much as Ryan Poles would love a clean slate, it doesn't work that way. And so that's part of it. Understanding that you've got a fan base with high expectations. They're going to have to set those accordingly with Caleb. And again, trust him to perform because of everything they're putting around him.
I told him that his second month on the job here, I said, listen, you're not accountable for any of your predecessors' failures and sins, but you're not set apart from them either. Like, they're part of your journey here, and you just got to understand that that's going to be part of the narrative. And I think it's gotten a little old. I think he understands that, like, the results have to come before that stuff recedes into the background. And if the results do come, it recedes in the background pretty quickly. People are quick to forget, as you mentioned earlier, the torture and the torment of things going astray. And it's just like, man, the joyride is cooking right now. Let's just stay on the joyride. So get the joyride going, and all that stuff will become a non-factor for as long as you can make it be a non-factor. Look, like, so I'll ask you a couple of questions just because our collective experience, I think, is good here. I really, going back to 2019 and the energy that was building up to that season, that season opener at Soldier Field, I'm going to open-end it, and then I'll steer you if you don't go to the place that I want you to go to. But
all right,
pre-game,
Packers. You're talking about the Packers
game. Yep. To Thursday night to kick off the 100th season of the NFL. You and I pack our stuff in the press box. We go over to Grant Park for a little while to take in the vibe over by Buckingham Fountain.
Beautiful day.
We're walking back to the stadium. Tell me what you remember about those next 40 minutes.
Walking back to the stadium?
Yeah, we had an encounter.
Oh my gosh.
Quarterback's father.
Keep going.
Dave Trubisky. You remember running into Dave Trubisky in the tunnel that crosses under the road's going up, and then it's that tunnel. And
I am remembering this now. I remember we saw Chris Owens walking through the parking lot. I remember, your longtime pal, and that's the memory that stands out. All right, yes. So I am remembering that we saw Dave. Yes.
So and Dave, I think he maybe had a couple pops leading up to the game, but he had said something to us along the lines of, if you guys, and he meant like Chicago media as a whole, would just ease up on him, everything is going to be okay. And it was like, this was like 45 minutes or 2 hours before the season opened, the 100th season. You're like, oh man, like some of the strain is already real, right? Like they haven't even played a game yet, but the weight of expectation is already being felt. Now, remember, there was moments during that training camp where it was bumpy, and you could tell it wasn't going on that upward climb that everyone expected it to go on. And if you were watching really closely on an everyday basis, you're like, oh man, there's some problems here right now with the way the quarterback and the offense are.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Coinciding and cohesion. And I vividly remember that moment because it was like, man, like we haven't even gotten to kickoff of the opener, and you could already feel like, oh God, like there is a little bit of heaviness to this excitement as well.
Yeah, all right. I'm glad you mentioned that because I had forgotten that and I wouldn't have pulled it on my own. But you're right. And we had been writing about Mitch's interceptions in camp and timing issues.
The eye test. Remember, that was a big thing. The eye test.
The eye test. Yeah, yeah. And boy, it played out that night at Soldier Field against the Packers. And it turned out there were opportunities in that game. The offense wasn't converting, and Mitch really didn't get unlocked in that game. And it really was an indicator not only of the problems ahead, but what a buzzkill. I mean, it was like almost overnight that buzz from the summer turned into a reality check. Like this offense isn't taking the step forward. And, you know, I was one of the folks that really tried to give Mitch the benefit of the doubt coming from the playoff game that
Right.
if Cody Parkey makes that field goal, Mitch Trubisky has a final 2 minutes of the fourth quarter comeback playoff win.
Right.
And it wasn't his fault and it wasn't his fault that they missed the kick. You know, he's on the sideline for the decisive play and he puts them in position. If that ball goes through the uprights instead of the double doink, he gets credit for a last minute comeback playoff win, and they get to play another game. Who knows what happens in that game that you might build off of? I think that's an important point when we think about week to week and the steadiness needed, the perspective from everyone on the outside is that understand that there are successes to build on, failures to overcome, and it's all cumulative.
Yes.
And so, it's fragile,
Great
it's
phrase.
cumulative. And so just understand that as you go. And I think, hey, the Justin Fields experience is part of this as well. There were times when there were mirages. I mean, just sensational athletic plays that Fields made that compelled the most hopeful thinkers to believe that this thing was solved.
Yeah.
Can you build on it? Can you turn it into consistency? And you see this going on with quarterbacks around the league. Like CJ Stroud is a good example of it right now. A really strong finish to his season. Jordan Love in Green Bay is another one.
Because
how do you build? How do you build?
Jordan Love for me is the show me again, and that to me is the test, because it's like, okay, if you have a good game, you got to have another good game. If you have two good games, you have to have a good month. If you have a good month, you have to have 2 good months. If you have a good 2 months, you have to have a good season. If you have a good season, you have to have 2 good seasons. And it's just like you're never there until you're there. And so just the reality of this climb and how steep it is something that I think the general public loses sight of so fast, no matter where they are on that climb, that they think the top is right there for them. And then the next thing you know, an avalanche hits you. And you bring up this idea of consistency and making plays when they're there. And it wasn't Mitch's fault that the kick was missed in the playoff game, but it might've been Mitch's fault that the kick was missed against the Chargers at Soldier Field in week 8 or 9 of the next season. And that to me was one of those, we used to call them lever losses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where the bottom falls out of your season because of something like that. And it was like, we spent the entire next week talking about the kick that was missed and the Matt Nagy decision to not put the ball on the hash mark that his kicker wanted it on, and the decision to not try to get more yards with the time to get more yards and all this stuff. And then you backed out of that and you're like, all those things were mistakes, but they were mistakes that wouldn't have come into play or mattered if Mitch didn't throw a fourth quarter interception on the visiting sideline to Casey Hayward, if he didn't fumble to give the Chargers their game-winning score, if earlier in that quarter he had completed a 58-yard touchdown pass to Trubisky to Gabriel down the right hash going north at Soldier Field, and you would have had this moment where the quarterback lifts you to a win that everyone's just like, all right, we won, we beat a team we should have. And instead it was like, we lost to a team that we shouldn't have, in a way that we shouldn't have, in a way that completely jeopardized our entire season. And it all came down to 4 or 5 plays from the quarterback.
Yeah. Dude, your memory is amazing that you could just reel off all of that. And now that when you're saying it, I remember it very clearly, but man, that's impressive. So here's my question then. From a football standpoint, how confident or how comfortable is the city with what is being put around Caleb Williams? One thing that stands out to me is that they don't have a veteran QB, a veteran backup in a way that you might typically have one. I don't want to use the Patrick Mahomes, Alex Smith comp on this one because Smith was still the starter, but you understand what I mean, that just that veteran mentor. Mark Sanchez. Yeah.
My guy. But look, I mean, that is a top.
And they don't have an offensive head coach, which I find a really interesting part of this dynamic. Go ahead.
The second one is a more valid point to me in the sense that people just forgot about it. This is all people were barking for in December and January, and then they decided to keep the head coach, and they went down this path, and they've got the quarterback, and the euphoria over getting the quarterback and then surrounding him with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore and Rome Odunze has just made people forget that, oh wait, we still have the same defensive-minded coach that everyone was griping about down the stretch of last season. That hasn't changed. And so is it 2-4 when that conversation reignites? And it's like, well, wait a second. Why did we give this guy a defensive-minded head coach? And so clearly the vote of confidence in Shane Waldron is huge, and the bet on Shane Waldron is huge. And they're going to have to figure out a way to capitalize on that.
And keep him if it works.
The interesting thing about the whole veteran quarterback thing is like the Bears did that in 21, where you brought in Andy Dalton, and you already had Nick Foles here. And so you had Justin Fields with two guys that presumably were going to be great mentors and great experienced leaders. And then you hear from people that were in the building at that time, and they said it didn't work. There was friction. It just it never synced up. And so the current philosophy there is that where the roster is at, they felt like they could spend their money better on other positions and other needs than bringing in a veteran quarterback to be the mentor. And so to fill that role, they hired a guy named Ryan Griffin as an offensive assistant coach, and he spent time in New Orleans with Drew Brees, and he spent time in Tampa with Brady during the 2 years that Brady was in Tampa, including the Super Bowl year. And they believe he can be that guy just without the player contract. So it's going to be really interesting to see if that relationship takes hold, because that's another one where there's a lot of leaps of faith being made here, and it's another one where it's like, okay, so does your quarterback have someone he can go to? Because Tyson Bagent, as impressive as his rookie year was, he's a second-year guy undrafted out of Shepherd University who doesn't have a library of experience that's going to be able to help Caleb Williams.
That's right.
And so how do you replicate that? And what do you do to overcome that? I think it's a very legitimate wait and see question that you asked there.
Yeah. And I think just the point overall is that try to see the situation clearly. I mean, see what the strengths are here, see what the potential weaknesses are here, and then let's watch the Bears go through all of this. I mean, how I feel about that Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, Matt LaFleur offense that has been passed down from Mike Shanahan. And the fact that Shane Waldron is from that lineage, to me, is as big of a stamp as any on the pro column on the list of pros and cons here, that they're going to be able to make this work and find what Caleb does well,
right,
and exploit that over and over.
Well, and that's some of what they're selling right now, is that Shane's adaptability sets him apart, that he can adapt basically the system around the quarterback. He can adapt his own teaching to the personality of the guy that he's working with. The sentiment is that in Seattle, you had to work with Russell Wilson and Drew Lock and Geno Smith, and you were helpful in bringing out Geno Smith's career resurgence. And part of it was your ability to kind of connect on that level with him after having to connect previously with Russell Wilson, who, as you know, is a very different personality. And so the ability to do that, to be adaptable to personality types, to skill sets, to being able to make it work in that way, that's what they're selling, And now look, I sit in the wait and see chair all the time covering this beat, because I've been sold a lot of stuff that never came to be, and so you want to experience it firsthand. You want to see it with your own eyes. You want to see what direction they take it. Look, there are fascinating times. I know we don't have time to cover everything I wanted to cover. We'll get to a couple more quick things here, but when you reflect back, you can use Mitch or Robert here, but obviously they both went down the trap door at some point, and it was just over before anyone expected it to be over. Is there a common thread in your mind to the flash and then the
No, there really wasn't, because I think that it's different reasons here. Trubisky ultimately was undone by the same types of questions that dogged him coming out of college. You know, his ability to play at the pro level, anticipate throws, see the field, see defenses. He had limited college experience as a starter, and there were questions about him coming out. There was a lot of reasons to like him coming out, and clearly the Bears did, and they ended up being wrong. They didn't develop him also, which is, it's draft and develop. He did not develop into that NFL passer. I don't feel like that was why Robert Griffin fell out in Washington. There's a way messier dynamic there between, ownership, coaching, the player, egos, injury. It wasn't because Robert's athleticism was in question, or if he couldn't see the field, that they couldn't coach around it. Clearly they had coached around that part of his development as a rookie. And so there were just different reasons that it fell apart. But for me, then maybe that's the takeaway. There's so many landmines everywhere.
Right.
You got to thread the needle and get through it all. And you never quite know. I mean, I think we've heard Ryan Poles in his public comments acknowledge the good fortune that the Bears have had here, but also the obligation or the dedication on the Bears side to absolutely make the most of the opportunity that has fallen into place for them because the Panthers were bad, and they traded with the Panthers and they happened to get this first pick and all that. I think when you look at that checklist, that pre-flight checklist, everything's checked off in this Caleb Williams situation. I mean, maybe if you want to say that the veteran backup or the veteran mentor is not there, but they've tried to account for that as best as possible. Everything seems to be checked off. And so, yeah, go nuts, buy the jersey, plan that watch party for the first game, got the schedule coming out, hopefully in short order here. And that he'll have some primetime stages early in his career. I'm kind of wondering personally, and I'll throw maybe a prediction out there. You've got Jaden Daniels in Washington, Caleb Williams in Chicago. Those two teams are scheduled to play each other.
They are.
It's number one versus number two. You get a primetime opportunity maybe in the first month of the season, something like that. Get your friends together, get the party table out, because enjoy the ride. It's so much better than the alternative.
They also play CJ Stroud, so you have last year's number 2 pick, offensive rookie of the year, against this year's number 1. There's a lot of things, and so that's where I wanted to close, because the schedule was presumably supposed to come out this week. It now looks like it might be pushed back a week. There may be some things happening with the networks trying to figure out some bigger business decisions with what's happening there. But
do they play the Panthers too?
They do.
So they get number 1 versus number 1. All right.
Yeah. The schedule from a quarterback versus quarterback standpoint, you go down the list and it's as fascinating as you're going to get. I think they have 6 games against quarterbacks that were also taken number 1 overall. Okay. They play Drake May, they play Jaden Daniels, they play JJ McCarthy twice. So there's appeal here. Now, again, everybody's got to stay healthy. That's the Dan Bernstein reminder that some of those matchups will end up being, Brett Rippon versus whoever the Patriots number 3 is,
Well, so let me stop you on that one just for a second, okay? Because in that 2012 season when Robert Griffin got hurt, okay, they replaced him in December with Kirk Cousins, who they drafted in the 4th round that year.
Of the same year.
And I remember being in the Redskins Park media room, and it's Saturday at that point. So I was in New York at Radio City Music Hall for the Griffin selection, was, backstage, following him around, kind of what you did with Caleb Williams in Detroit to the extent that you could. And so then you're back on Saturday at the team facility for just that ultra, boring day. You just, it's a marathon. You're just slogging through it. But really it's that hangover from Thursday. I mean, you're buzzing off that day, and no matter who they pick today, the focus is on who they got at the top of the draft. And then they draft Kirk Cousins, who, if you want to talk about career earnings, career wins, career success, I mean, has just run circles around Robert. And so, yeah, man, stability at the position and draft and development, that's a really good example of what coaching and development can do. I interrupted you, but no, I had to get that Kirk nugget in there because it's relevant. I mean,
it is, right? Like, and you just prepare yourself for a longer play in that regard. So I may duck out from the camera here to grab a piece of paper on my desk here, but schedule release day was one of your favorite days of the year. And I always enjoyed watching you work, because you would have I want you to explain to the audience spreadsheet of like desired hotels in the road city, and your ability to pull the trigger on Marriott's for all the road games of a NFL season was like second to none. Like I'd get an email with here's the itinerary, here's the places. It was wild to watch you work on that thing.
Well, it's a matter of knowing where to stay, and after you're in the league for long enough, covering the league long enough, you know where to stay, and so you could have every hotel that their reservation open on a tab in your browser. You just don't know the dates yet, and as soon as you get those dates. And then you also know which are the tougher ones to come by. It's not as, let's say Detroit. That's an easy one to book. There are a couple of options out by the airport. Rare that you stay downtown unless you're getting the Ren Center downtown. And even then the cost was usually prohibitive. But there are some places, and I'm looking at the list of opponents this coming year that you want to be on top of.
Right.
San Francisco,
okay,
for example, right?
I actually was on this morning looking at San Jose hotels.
You would. That just tells you where you talk about career development and the evolution. That's where you are now. I mean, the last time you and I were in San Francisco covering the game Christmas of
2018,
the 2018 season, and we were in San Francisco, man. We're heart of it, drinking Irish coffees after sundown.
So
what else is on your paper here?
So now all these 9 road cities are ones that I've been with you in, and I want to know which one you would be earmarking. Like say the opportunity was there to go in a day early, perhaps. Which one of these would you be most looking forward to going in a day early? You got your 3 division games, and you've got Arizona, San Francisco, Houston, home of David Haugh's first Uber ride, Indianapolis, Washington, and London.
Yeah, to London. I forgot you guys are going to London. That's pretty cool. Well, let's take that one off the list. That one's as go early as possible, stay as late as possible.
It's a little fishy.
And Carolina's on there too, right?
No, Carolina plays here.
It's at Soldier Field. All right, because I was going to say that golf opportunity is very underrated, maybe a little under the radar. I think it's San Francisco. DC for me is always kind of jumps off the page. Maybe more so than someone who isn't from there, but that one to me is awesome.
As we close, can I tell the story of the trip to Arizona in 2018?
Yes. And in fact, I was actually going through some photos the other day and saw the picture of us at the top of Camelback Mountain doing some kind of pose. And I was lucky to be standing on 2 feet at that point.
I was going to say the top of Camelback Mountain was triumphant. It was about a third of the way
up.
A
lot of adversity.
The third of the way up when you were dry heaving up against a rock and really struggling to get your bearings and really what we determined is all you needed was one Cliff Bar. It was like the greatest Cliff Bar advertisement ever to get you to the top of that mountain, but that was a good hike there.
You can't pull up Camelback Mountain on Google or your phone without coming across some type of warning about eating breakfast. Like, just don't be an idiot and just make sure you put something in your stomach. And there I go, an eighth of the way up the mountain. Like, man, this is a lot harder than I thought it would be.
And then we'll close on that because we're coming down the mountain. It's starting to get to be really, really Arizona hot, like 10, 15 in the morning. And there was a bachelorette party of about like 15 girls coming up, and they were all dressed in black. And it was clear that they had been out the night before. And like you and I just looked at each other like they are dead. Like there is no way they are surviving.
I'm not sure they made it off.
I think they may have been airlifted later, but that's how we'll close it. We've covered a ton of ground, more than I expected to, more than I planned to keep you here. But you're pretty good at this. You should look into doing this for a living at some point in your life.
I'll send you my resume. My resume. Always awesome talking football with you and the quarterback carousel, man. It's exciting to watch from afar, and personally, I'm excited for you to get to go through it. I mean, just a player like Caleb. I mean, it's just for a reporter, a lot to be excited about and the chance to tell a lot of stories. And
I'll be honest, I felt a little bit of energy in Detroit, just understanding that this ride is real and it's going to be fun to chronicle one way or the other. So that's David Haugh's fill-in, Rich Campbell. I'm Dan Wiederer. Thank you guys as always for joining the Take the North podcast. Remember to subscribe, tell your friends about the show. And if you are interested in watching it on our YouTube page, 670 The Score has all the episodes of Take the North on their YouTube page. For Rich Campbell, I'm Dan Wiederer. Adam Stanzunsky, our stud producer. That'll do it for this episode to Take the North.